Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Tap and Go. We've got a real treat for you today. Our guest today endured a long and glittering career playing rugby union. He featured at club and international level for Auckland and the All Blacks respectively. He won countless accolades on both fronts, including 8 national provincial championships and a World Cup. 6 years into his professional career, he was bestowed the honour of the New Zealand captaincy, serving as leader of one of the world's finest sports teams. He remained in this post until his retirement in 1997 and is lauded as one of New Zealand's top 10 players in their history. It's of course the one, the only Sean Fitzpatrick. What a treat this next half hour or so will be for us. Sean, how are you?
I'm very good, guys. We're down in New Zealand at the moment, so we've enjoyed we came down to New Zealand. We live in London, and we sort of spend every Christmas in this beautiful part of the world. We normally come down for sort of a month or so. We've been here nearly 6 months, and we're heading back next week actually. So looking forward to getting back to London, but really enjoyed our time here in sort of COVID-free New Zealand, which is just so bizarre considering what else is going on around the world.
So we want to start off by sort of asking about your career and starting there. So how do you get into rugby? How did it all start?
I think I sort of grew up in the 60s and 70s in New Zealand, and it was just the way life was in those days. Rugby was the main sport, which it's our national game here. And in the 60s and 70s, that's what we did. And, the rugby clubs were very much part of the community. It's a community-based game. So, the rugby club and where I came from in Auckland here was, the centre of the community, really. And that's how I got into it, I suppose, like every other kid. We played rugby at lunchtime. We got home. We had test matches on the back lawn, trying to emulate our stars, which were the All Blacks, and I might even say in those days it was the British and Irish Lions after that great tour here in '71. My father was an All Black, so that obviously helped in terms of the genes, I suppose. But we're just normal kids growing up. Street rugby, kicking the ball over the power lines, dive passing, sidestepping. Just enjoying life.
Yeah, so obviously one of your main things, you're captain of the All Blacks. We're wondering, sort of looking back at the game of rugby as it is in the modern day compared to when you were captain, do you think the role of the captain's changed, especially like the development of the distractions away from the game?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for the players today. Some of the challenges they have today, we didn't have in terms of social media and obviously the money that is involved in the game now. When I started playing for the All Blacks, I'm a builder by trade. That's what we did. We'd train at 6 o'clock in the morning, run to work, work on the building site all day, then run home and go to training. That was our life, and we absolutely loved it. We didn't have gyms in those days. I didn't start going to the gym until after the World Cup in '91. So that was, 6 years into my All Black career. I've never been to a gym. So, I think life was pretty simple in terms of rugby. I think, obviously I'm still involved in the club game and have a little bit to do with the All Blacks, but, it's very similar, to be honest. At the end of the day, it's about winning. It's a performance-based game. And, we had some great success, with university and then with Auckland. And then that flowed onto the All Blacks. And it was enjoyable.
I guess one player that you had the pleasure of playing with is sort of the great Jonah Lomu. And sort of, I guess, especially for me and Freddie, looking back, we were too sort of young to be able to fully appreciate what the things that he did for the game. But I just wanted to ask, what was it like sort of playing with him, sort of, I guess, on the field, but also what was he like as a teammate off the field?
Yeah, Jonah, he was a very humble man, and surprisingly, you'd be surprised with this, he was very shy, and he used to express himself on the field. So, I was fortunate enough to play with Jonah. He came into the All Blacks, and I remember seeing him in 1993 at Carisbrook. We were playing Australia one Saturday afternoon, and the New Zealand secondary schools were playing the Australian secondary schools in the curtain raiser before our game. And I remember watching, and in the space of 20 minutes, that this number 8 scored 3 tries for New Zealand secondary schools. And we all said, who is this number 8? And it was a one Jonah Lomu. And little do we know that 8 months down the road in '94, he'd be playing for the All Blacks on the wing as the youngest All Black ever. And he had his challenges, obviously, in terms of, firstly, playing on the wing. He'd never been a winger before. So that was a new game for him. And obviously, without us knowing, he had his kidney disorder, which was a major hurdle for him in terms of loading fitness. But to do what he did and to get into the All Blacks, in '95, where he'd been sent away because he wasn't fit enough. So he'd been sent to play sevens, believe it or not. And it was only through an injury that he went to the World Cup in '95. And we wanted to be the fittest and fastest team at the World Cup. We had quite a small team, but we were hugely fit and fast. And we played this high tempo game that we were going to recycle the ball really quickly to try and break down defences and then spread the ball wide to our little nippy wingers, who was one Jeff Wilson and one Eric Rush. With Rushy getting injured, it gave Jonah the opportunity, and he just was just a sensation at the World Cup. And I always say that he is, even to this day, he's the only global superstar. Matt, you're in Boston. Everyone knew who Jonah Loma was in Boston after the World Cup in '95. So he was our only global superstar. And what people don't realise, like you guys, you sort of think, he had years in the All Blacks. He literally became a world superstar in the space of 5 games at that World Cup. And then we played Australia at the end of '95. And then we went to France, and he was just on fire, and that was Jonah. And then the following year, unfortunately, he didn't make the Test team, but he was the most wonderful man, great team man. He was the first one who made real money out of the game, but it didn't change him. He was a total team man, as I said, very humble, very shy. But a great asset, and we miss him dearly.
His impact at that World Cup can't be underdone. His 4 tries against England. Do you think without him, the All Blacks would have still done as well as they did at that World Cup?
I think he had a major influence, without question. But I think the style of rugby we were playing, the world hadn't really seen that sort of rugby played before, like that. And I would like to think that we would have done as well. I don't know if we would have scored some of the tries that he scored, but he was a great asset, as I said, to have in our team in '95, without question.
I guess when you're talking about sort of growing up in New Zealand and sort of the rugby culture behind it, and so I guess New Zealand's sort of known as like there's no other place in the world for it with such a deep history, and it's been sort of accredited with one of the main reasons behind why the All Blacks are so popular, because of this sort of culture. And then you actually spoke about when you joined the Scarlets, this was the closest thing to New Zealand. Why would you say that?
I think, as I spoke about at the start, Matt, I think that community-based game is really important. And that's, at the moment, we've got a real challenge here in New Zealand with grassroots rugby and the community-based games, because we need funding. And hence why the private equity is, New Zealand Rugby is looking at Silver Lake to invest in, or Silver Lake's looking to invest in New Zealand Rugby, which is needed at the moment. And the Scarlets, as I said, West Wales, it's the only game in town. There's no football in West Wales, and rugby. I just love seeing. You look at the list of sponsors of the Scarlets. They're everyone that, the little shops on the high streets, the butcher, the pharmacy, all these places, and it means so much to them. Not just the Scarlets, but the 4 regional teams, and obviously Wales winning the 6 Nations this year. You can just see the outpouring of love for the team, which I love. I absolutely love. I love going down there and seeing what it means to people. Going to the little clubs, within the Scarlets region, and seeing how they have such pride in their jerseys, which is very similar to here in New Zealand. We're very tribal, but ultimately, like Wales, the national team is crucial to growing the game. To have those Jonah Lomas, to have those stars that the young kids, like I did, running around the backyard with my brother, pretending I was an All Black or pretending I was Gareth Edwards, as it was in our day.
You touched on how important the game is for New Zealand, and looking back at Wales, and you talked about the 6 Nations. How crucial do you think this some final form for Wales will be coming up in the next couple of years leading up to World Cup again?
Well, I think it's, we're in the middle of the cycle at the moment, and the World Cup is the most important thing for the players today and the coaches. And the coaches are judged on World Cups, their success in World Cups, and I just think that now we've got some real challenges. The All Blacks, year in year out, have been ranked the number one team in the world. Now the other teams are getting better without question, and it's not a home run in terms of the All Blacks winning in 2023. And with this pandemic, obviously that's sort of upsetting. Where the game's going at the moment is, South Africa hasn't played a game since 2019. So it's going to be really interesting times. But teams are getting better. The analysis, the way the game's been played, the way they view the All Blacks. So Ian Foster and his team are going to have to work really hard to beat teams like France, to beat teams like Wales, South Africa, obviously England. The job they did in the All Blacks in the semi-final was a real eye-opener to a lot of New Zealand fans who didn't really see that coming. If us living in the UK, we sort of saw that coming, where a lot of people in this part of the world didn't see England in terms of having that game in them.
What went wrong for New Zealand that day, in your opinion?
I think we didn't have a great day, and England had their World Cup final day, and that's always the pressure that's on the All Blacks. That every game the All Blacks play, the opposition play a World Cup final, because they want to beat the All Blacks, and if we are 5-10% off our game, we're going to lose, and a couple of players that day. And probably the team in general will be really disappointed in that performance that we couldn't get into the game. We couldn't get our game going.
And it's sort of been 18 months since that World Cup, and sort of, I guess we've had a bit of a brief pause with the virus and everything, but we saw a quick glimpse of sort of what the All Blacks are like with the appointed new head coach Ian Foster. Do you think New Zealand rugby is sort of heading in the right direction and in sort of at a good rate, or sort of how have basically what are the changes? The major changes between the All Blacks of 2019 to today?
I think there's a number of personnel changes that in terms of some players have moved on, but we haven't played a test since last year. So this year we haven't played any test rugby at all. So that's difficult to gauge where we're at. We've got our Super Rugby going on at the moment, and there's been some fantastic games in that over the last few weeks. But there's still a huge depth of players here. But until we get to that stage of playing international rugby, it's really hard to gauge where you're at, because you might have good Super Rugby players or good Gallagher Premiership players, or top 14, or those sort of players that are good at that level, but you don't know what it's like until they get into that cauldron of Test rugby, and some players get exposed. Some players don't want to step into that unknown, but you don't experience that until you play those tight games.
And how do you think sort of the Super Rugby? Sorry. How do you think the Super Rugby is doing? Sorry. Right.
So I'll ask the question myself. How do I think the Super Rugby is going at the moment? It's really interesting. It's really interesting because we've got teams now. The Crusaders have been beaten twice in the last few weeks. They just won last week with a golden goal. So if you're not from Canterbury, everyone's pretty excited about what's going on. The Chiefs have just had an unbelievable turnaround in performance. They're 4 on the trot now. So, that's really, the Crusaders are obviously going to be the team to defend. They're going to play in the final. It's almost certain they're going to make the final. And it's now, a toss-up between, 3 other teams, or definitely the Blues and the Chiefs, who's going to get that other spot in the final.
Do you sort of enjoy the format with just the New Zealand teams?
I think last year was a real novelty. And I think you can see that by the crowds that are turning up. Last year, everyone was really excited by it. I think we're now looking forward, now that the 2 Pacific Island teams have been approved, and hopefully Australia will go with it also to have, you know, back to Super 12 for next year. That'll be really exciting. I think the Fijians and the Moana Pacifica team are going to really bring a different flavour, and it's great for the islands to have teams like that. To have Fiji based in Fiji is going to be really exciting.
I think one thing which has been highlighted with just having the New Zealand teams play the New Zealand teams is the huge amounts of prospects that the New Zealand rugby system's got coming through the route grand routes. There's so many people who've broken onto the scene, even if it is just their club in the last 12 months. How exciting a time is this for looking at youngsters who are going to break into the All Blacks in the next 12, 18 months?
Well, I think it's, as we're talking about mid-cycle going forward, what we need to find is those players that can go to the next level. Whether Hoskins or Tutu, for example, can be the number 8 at the World Cup in 2023. You know, those sort of questions are going to be answered, Freddie, by playing these games. Because I tell you what, they're holding nothing back in terms of, you know, the Aaron Smiths of the world. He wants that jersey. You know, there's another couple of young halfbacks that are playing really well. So everyone's fighting, and as I said, without a lot of Test rugby, these guys are totally focusing on playing for the Highlanders or playing for the Blues, Crusaders, to make their mark. Because, you know, there's, as you just said, there's a lot of talent around, but you need to be noticed. They're working really hard, as with Grant Fox last week, who's one of the All Black selectors. You know, and they're watching very closely. There's some young kids that I won't mention, but they're watching some young kids that even I hadn't really heard about, that are real prospects for 2023.
And I guess another prospect that we heard news a few weeks ago is, I guess, the Roger Tuivasa-Sheck moving over from the Warriors to the Blues. Is this sort of what should we expect from this?
To be honest, I don't know a lot about Roger. Obviously, living here in Auckland and the Warriors had a great game yesterday. They beat St. George, and Roger was the star player in the game. So he's you know, he's going to be a great addition to the All Blacks, or dare I say it, firstly to Auckland. There's no guarantees that he's going to get in the All Blacks. But the people that I've spoken to about him, they reckon he's got the best feet in the game in both codes in terms of what he can do. He's had a stellar rugby league career. He came from rugby, played schoolboy rugby, so he understands the game. They're thinking they'll probably play him at 12 inside centre. So that's pretty exciting. So he'll join the Auckland NPC team. I think from September they start playing, and it'll be, you know, really exciting to see how he goes. But also on the back of that, Matt, is the audience that he'll bring with him. You know, his social media, following those platforms. He is a huge name here in New Zealand, you know, in both codes. So he's going to bring a lot of people with him. So people like you can watch on different platforms and see what he can do. But yeah, it's exciting times. So he's got to earn a spot. You know, playing against 13 men is a lot different than playing against 15 men in terms of space that you're given. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how he goes.
What are your views on the players who sort of in the last 12 months have been playing in Japan, they've been playing in the Japanese league, and now coming back to the New Zealand rugby? Is that a good thing for New Zealand rugby? They're coming back, where they've learned stuff?
I quickly mentioned that private equity at the start. You know, the reason we need private equity is probably there's a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is to keep our leading All Blacks here in New Zealand. And not necessarily have to have sabbaticals where they go to Japan, have a year off. So the Retallicks of the world, the Barretts of the world, TJ Perenara, we really want them playing here in New Zealand. So financially, it's obviously for them to keep them in New Zealand, we have to give them these sabbaticals. Otherwise, you know, they'll be gobbled up by the French clubs of the world or the English clubs of the world, and we won't see them playing Test rugby. So yeah, it's working at the moment. You know, Beauden Barrett is playing sensational rugby up here at the moment. I think he's sort of cut him to shreds. and hopefully they'll come back rested and ready to go for next year. Retallick's, he's world class. He's probably, for us, he's probably been the biggest loss not having him around, because he is seriously world class in terms of what he can do.
And do you think, so I guess the game is ever getting sort of more physically rigorous, and sort of, are these sabbaticals, are they sort of almost necessary for these players, especially if they've been playing at such a high level for so long, or do you not think so?
Yeah, I think a player like Brodie Retallick can't, year in, year out. If we want to get another World Cup out of him, he needs to be rested, and so that's sensible. Because the game is physical. It's more physical now. They're trying to depower it a bit, especially at the collision area. With the referees getting a lot more involved and trying to depower that area of the game, which I think is good. Because we can't continue to have injuries, and obviously the safety factor in terms of the head injuries is a major talking point at the moment.
And I guess you sort of mentioned briefly sort of like the likes of Retallick and so on, and I guess New Zealand's so spoilt for choice in a variety of positions, but one that sort of keeps coming up as debate is the fly half position with the Beauden Barrett, Richie Mo'unga debate. And do you carry on with this dual axis, or do you just have one at 10 and drop the other? What's your sort of stance on this?
I personally think it works. It's not, that wasn't the reason we lost to England. I quite like it. If Mo'unga and Barrett can work together, and you if you actually studied it, and I'm sure a lot of people have, the analysis around in terms of the number of times Barrett receives the ball at 10, or he's the first receiver, is quite high. So I personally like it. And that's, it's up for debate. But, Ian Foster and Grant Fox and co, they know what they want, the style of rugby they want to play. The argument is that, Barrett had his biggest influence when he came off the bench. When he started his career, he had a huge impact off the bench. And, and I'm sure coaches today are looking at that. When the team's fatigued, why not bring in your best players then? I'm sure they'll keep, the armchair critics in New Zealand and around the world will keep debating whether Barrett, best number 10 in the world, should be playing at 10, or Mo'unga, who's been in scintillating form for the Crusaders, will start at 10. But it's a nice problem to have, Matt, to have two world-class 10s. There is a really nice problem for the All Black selectors to have.
One other nice problem is in our position is obviously your position, hooker. You've obviously got the likes of Dane Coles and Cody Taylor, but you've also got the youngsters of who are they? Got Amur coming through and Samasoni. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that position? Because they've got more options than anyone else.
Yeah, I think they were really lucky, and I don't know if you saw overnight, but Dane Coles has re-signed till 2023.
Yeah.
After sort of talking about possibly retiring, he is a huge asset to the All Blacks and New Zealand rugby, and we're thrilled that he's re-signed. That's really cool. And Cody Taylor's just has been in great form during Super Rugby, and as you said, there's a number of young kids that are coming through. And by 2023, it's a long time. It's another 2 years of rugby. So the young names that you mentioned will be given an opportunity, I'm sure. Amor has been around for a little while. He's got a few test caps. He's a huge man. But we'll just see what happens over the next 2 years.
Of course. And I guess, so we're in this new cycle, and I guess one thing that came up a couple of years ago is after Steve Hansen left, it was obviously sorry. I have a mind blank. Ian Foster, of course. Ian Foster just jumped in. Do you think he was the right person to choose as opposed to sort of Scott Robertson or perhaps any other coach? Yeah,
there's two. I personally think he was the right choice. He's in the system. He's well liked. He has a great mind in terms of developing game plans, and a lot of the game plans the All Blacks have been putting in place for the last number of years. The players like him. So, why would you change him? And the reason to change is to have total change, new voices, and that's the Scott Robinson argument. and he's done a phenomenal job at Super Rugby level, and his time will come. But I think at the moment, and a lot of people would say, well, who would want to follow on from Steve Hansen in terms of what he achieved? He left the All Blacks in such a great order. Yeah, we didn't win the World Cup in 2019, but that to me doesn't reflect on what Steve Hansen did for New Zealand rugby. He is a great servant of New Zealand rugby. He loves the All Black jersey. And we talk about handing the jersey back in a better condition than what we got it in. He has definitely done that without question. So Ian Foster's got a tough act to follow. It's like Wayne Pivac taking over Wales. It's not an easy job, but that's fine. That's cool. That's what they did a job for. And as I said earlier, it's a result-driven business. So Ian will be judged on that when he finally gets to play a game.
Sticking on the theme of coaches, I think you spoke quite recently about Eddie Jones as well and the pressure that he's now slowly coming under because he's sort of been underperforming since that World Cup. What are your thoughts on, I think you said that the RFU can't afford to get rid of him, but potentially a replacement in the future, or when you think he'll potentially step back from the role?
I don't know. He's obviously, he hasn't had a great run in the Six Nations, obviously. And not a great run, to be honest, since the World Cup, which he did a phenomenal job. I actually like what Eddie's done. I think he's been really good for English rugby, and that's not just English rugby as the first team, their international team, but rugby in general throughout. The Premiership and the number of players he's had a huge influence on, and changing the way they prepare to play rugby. And that's, I think, one of the question marks over English rugby in years gone by is the preparation of the players. In terms of that, desire to wear the England jersey, that's fine. But how do you prepare to deliver week in, week out? You deliver for your club. No matter who you are, you play. I always remember him saying that, you play well for England, but you've got to go back to the club and back it up and play well for your clubs. And if you don't do that, I'm not going to pick you. God, I'd never heard that before, which I think is good. So I think all in all, he's done a phenomenal job in developing the game in England. But it's hard work, and a lot of these players, have finally realising that to be the best player in the world is not easy. I think that's what Eddie's brought to the way they prepare. So, it's mid-cycle again. I'm sure they won't change him, and as you said, whether they can afford to change him or not, that's another question. But I think he'll be at the next World Cup without question, coaching England.
When the time comes, who could be a possible replacement, do you think?
This is an international job now. The Rob Baxters of the world, those sort of people who have been, around the Gustards of the world. There's a number of England coaches that are doing incredibly well, coaching club rugby. I think it's about getting experience. And I think that's one thing New Zealand does really well in terms of their pathway. They send them offshore to get experience. You look at Ronan O'Gara, for example. The benefit that he has gained from going to the Crusaders. He probably took a huge cut in wage to go there. Learned so much there. He's now gone to La Rochelle, doing really well there, and he's just broadened his horizon rather than just staying coaching Munster or whatever. He's actually gone out and he's learning different skills. And I think that's what, a number of New Zealand coaches around the world, they learn. They go offshore and it's not easy. As we talk about in terms of the players, it's hard. It's hard work being a coach. But you've got to get experience. And that's maybe something that we're not doing that well in the UK.
Yeah. And I guess sort of when you look at all the international coaches in the world, I think it's fair to say that sort of the New Zealand as a nation sort of dominate where these coaches are from. If you look at, I guess, obviously Ian Foster, Jamie Joe, and so on. What is that because they go abroad, or is it because of the culture back home, or what makes sort of
I think they learn really well here, Matt, to start with. I think that most of the good coaches have come right through from the little schoolboys, to first 15 rugby, then to club rugby, then to provincial rugby, ITN Cup, and then maybe if they're lucky enough to get a Super Rugby job, and then they head offshore. The Dave Rennies of the world, for example, Wayne Smith, for example, Graham Henry, for example, Steve Hansen, Jamie Joseph, as you mentioned, Warren Gatlin. They all travelled, and some of them have been luckier than others, but it's important to gain experience, and you don't just get it by staying in your hometown and where it's comfortable.
So we've got a couple more questions left, but we want to sort of take a step back and look at, I guess, the All Blacks and rugby as a whole. And I was sort of wondering who, in your opinion, was the greatest All Black ever?
The greatest All Black ever. I don't know. I'm an NRA. I love the All Blacks. I loved all the history of it. The Dave Gallagher, our first All Black captain. The Colin Meads of the world, Brian Lahore. You mentioned Jonah Lomu, Michael Jones, Sir John Kerwin. I just love. I was fortunate. I played in a really special era of New Zealand rugby, and played with some of the most phenomenal athletes you'd ever play with, and some really good people. The Zinzan Brooks of the world. So, who's the greatest All Black? It's a hypothetical question. In an era, Colin Meads was probably the greatest All Black in his era. John Alomu might have been the greatest in his time. Richie McCaw, just what Richie did. To play 149 internationals. I think he started in 148 internationals. To win 2 World Cups. It would be hard to go past Richie. But I look at great All Blacks and think, to be a great All Black, you have to be able to get in the World 15. That's how in terms of great All Blacks. But no, I couldn't name one of them because they're all bloody good.
If anyone having that conversation,
I think my time too, we sort of changed from, and the Steve Hansons of the world, Graham Henry, Laurie Mains, John Hart, those sort of coaches, Brian Lahore, they were big on picking good people. We might not have been the greatest All Blacks, but they wanted teams of good people, and I think that's something that we hold dear to ourselves is humility. And we don't really talk about great All Blacks. We don't even have reunions for individual teams. We have reunions for All Blacks. We don't have a reunion for the '96 All Black team that won, or the 1987 All Blacks, or the 19. We just have an All Black reunion, which sort of typifies that where once an All Black, always an All Black, and it's about the jersey. It's not about one individual team or one individual person. So that's already got around your tricky question, man.
Almost impossible.
That demonstrates why the All Black sort of background has got the legacy it does. Before we close, we've got one question which we asked the majority of our guests, and that is what your favourite moment in rugby is. It could be either from your career or something that's happened since that you've watched and thought that is
in rugby.
Whatever. Yeah.
I'm really fortunate because I like sport, and I obviously love rugby. I've been to every World Cup, either as a player or as a working with ITV or as a fan. And I think every World Cup has got better and better. I think the World Cup in Japan was, I was so fortunate to be at that. I just thought it was the most brilliant World Cup in Japan, and they just the best hosts ever, and some of the best rugby. World Cup cricket final one day, that was pretty cool. I went to that at Lord's, although we lost.
A great day.
It was an amazing day of sport. So I love that. I was there with the family, and then this year, being here in New Zealand and watching the America's Cup on the harbour out here, in the Gulf, was just, in terms of seeing New Zealand celebrate when we won that last race. So that was pretty cool. Burling and those guys have just done did a phenomenal job. But it was a great day of sport. So if I have to name a rugby sporting moment, it was probably when we won in Loftus Versfeld in 1996. The first time an All Black team had won there on tour, and to win a series in South Africa. For me, that made a lot of old All Blacks very happy. There's a guy called Don Clark, who's one of our great All Blacks, who's sadly not with us any longer. On that day in June, I walked back in the tunnel at Loftus Versfeld, and he came up to me, and he had tears rolling down his face. and he hugged me. And in those days, All Blacks didn't really hug each other. And he said, Sean, thank you for doing something that no other All Black team has ever done, to win a series in South Africa. I can die a happy man. So that's what it meant to that generation. But it was a pretty cool moment.
Well, Sean, that was awesome. That was actually incredible hearing about sort of your career and the sort of your insights in rugby and world rugby at the moment. I'm sure our listeners would have loved that, but that was actually such a incredible talk. Thank you very much for jumping on.
Thanks, guys. And keep well and stay warm in Boston. And Freddie, I might see you down at the Stoop at some stage, or you might come to West Wales to see some proper rugby.
Either or. Thank you very much.
Mate.
Awesome.
Okay, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Cheers.
Come on! Come on! Go!
Thanks for listening to the Tap and Go podcast. I'm Guy Thompson and I'm a Looseheads ambassador, the mental health movement normalising the conversation in rugby. Head over to looseheads.co.uk and get 15% off at the checkout now with code TAP and GO. Take care.